I never wanted to be one of those women with a tragedy story. The kind people whisper about at baby showers, the cautionary tale lurking behind the pastel balloons and registry lists. But I became one anyway. My name is Abigail Harris, and 6 months ago I watched a stranger give birth to my child, only to watch her vanish with him before we could even cut the cord. Like and subscribe if you've ever trusted someone only to find out they'd been writing a script of betrayal long before you knew there was a plot. It began 3 years ago when Dr. Kravitz looked at me across the ultrasound screen, his mouth pressed into a thin line that made my stomach drop before he even said a word. "I'm sorry, Abigail," he said. "The scarring's extensive. Even if you were to conceive, you wouldn't be able to carry to term." The phrase echoed in my head for weeks like a curse. Wouldn't be able. I was 34, with a stable job in tech compliance, a husband who still reached for my hand at red lights, and a house full of empty rooms we thought we'd fill with Lego piles and lullabies. I tried to make peace with it. We talked about adoption. We hosted brunches. We traveled to Portugal and smiled in photos. But one morning, brushing my teeth in silence beside Noah, I just turned to him and said, "What about surrogacy?" That single question sent us tumbling down a path paved in contracts, consultations, and cautious hope. We didn't want to go through an agency, too sterile, too impersonal, so we placed a few quiet inquiries through friends, eventually connecting with a woman named Elise Mallory. She came recommended by a coworker of mine who knew her through a community parenting group in Maryland. "She's done this before," my friend assured me. "She's warm, responsible. She understands what's at stake." Elise met us at a sunlit cafe near DuPont Circle, her hair pulled into a tidy braid, her smile quick and gentle. She didn't fidget. She didn't talk about money first. She asked about us. What kind of home we had. What books we'd read to our child. "I want to help someone experience motherhood," she said, holding her chamomile tea like it was something sacred. "It's not about the paycheck for me." I should have known better. Still, we moved forward. We hired a lawyer. We drafted a surrogacy agreement that, in hindsight, now seems like it was written in sand. Our state, Virginia, was one of the more ambiguous ones when it came to parental rights in surrogacy arrangements. There were protections, but not airtight ones. Our lawyer assured us we'd be fine. Elise lived just across the state line in Maryland, and as long as the birth occurred there, we were told it would strengthen our claim as the intended parents. We even added a clause about postnatal custody and hospital discharge protocol. Elise signed without protest. Noah and I left the lawyer's office that day floating, daring to imagine bassinets and bottle warmers again. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Elise sent us updates, photos of her bump, audio clips of the baby's heartbeat, even snippets from her prenatal yoga classes. We FaceTimed every Sunday. I coordinated every appointment, attended ultrasounds, even helped pick out nursery paint swatches. She called him your little one, always with a smile, always with that same calm I'd come to associate with her. I bought her organic vitamins. She bought baby socks with dinosaurs on them. We sent her care packages. She knitted us a blue and white blanket. We trusted her. Then came the delivery. It happened on a gray March morning after a sudden text from Elise. "It's time." We raced to Johns Hopkins Hospital, adrenaline eclipsing every rational thought. Elise was already in early labor when we arrived. Nurses hustled around her while I held her hand. She was brave, focused, and when the baby crowned, I sobbed like a child. I'd never felt so terrified or so full of love. They laid him on her chest for a moment, protocol, they said, and I stood beside her, crying, whispering his name over and over. We'd chosen Owen. Owen Elias Harris. Then something shifted. After the placenta was delivered and Owen was cleaned, A nurse began wheeling him toward the bassinet that had been prepared for us. But Elise spoke up, voice low but firm. "No. He stays with me." The room fell still. I looked at her, certain I'd misunderstood. "What?" I said. She didn't even meet my eyes. "I'm breastfeeding," she said. We talked about this. We had not. Security was called. Lawyers were phoned. Elise insisted on her right to keep the baby for postnatal bonding, claiming Maryland laws supported maternal custody at birth, surrogate or not. The hospital deferred. "We don't arbitrate," the administrator told us. "We follow state guidelines." The discharge papers listed her name, not mine. They let her leave with my son. She disappeared that night. Noah fell into shock, then into rage. I became machinery, functioning, researching, filing motions. We tried emergency custody filings, but Elise had vanished into a legal haze. Every address we had led to vacant listings or sympathetic neighbors who hadn't seen her in months. Our lawyer grew quieter with every call. "There's a loophole," he admitted one day. Without a court order prior to birth, Maryland may recognize the birth mother as the default guardian. The weeks that followed bled together. I barely slept. I stopped going into the office. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Celeste with piercing eyes and a folder full of surrogacy custody nightmares. She traced Elise's phone usage, looked at bank records, even checked public Wi-Fi logins. Nothing. For 2 months, it was as if the earth had swallowed her. Then came the first real lead, an emailed receipt for an infant car seat from a baby goods store in Richmond, time-stamped a week prior. The name was fake, but the card used matched Elise's known debit number. She was moving carefully, but not invisibly. What I didn't expect was how complicated it would feel to see those purchases. Bottles. A white noise machine. Organic formula. A receipt for board books and a tiny pair of canvas shoes with foxes on them. She was caring for him. She hadn't dumped him in a motel room or left him with strangers. Owen was with her, alive and likely well. But each item she bought drove a splinter deeper into my chest. She was living the life I was supposed to have. She was becoming the mother I had planned to be. There's a certain madness that sets in when grief meets obsession. I started building a map. Pins and notes covered our guest room wall, phone pings, receipt dates, road routes. I listened to audiobooks on infant attachment. I scrolled parenting blogs. I watched her old social media accounts, hoping for a breadcrumb, even a slip. And when I finally caught one, a tagged photo from a consignment shop's Facebook page showing Elise browsing strollers, I stared at it for hours. She was thinner. She looked tired. But she was holding Owen, wrapped snug against her chest in that same blue and white blanket she'd once knitted for me. I haven't told anyone yet. Not Noah, not even Celeste. But I'm going there. I know the shop's hours. I've called pretending to be a first-time mom looking for discounts. They remembered her. "Sweet girl," the owner said. "Always talks to the baby like he's the whole world." What do you do when the person who stole your child is also the only mother he's known? When the villain in your story still sings lullabies and rocks him to sleep? I don't have the answer. Not yet. But I'm going to find them. Both of them. And when I do, I'll have to decide, do I reclaim my son and break the only bond he's ever known, or walk away and live with the silence forever? The law may not have protected me, but I am still his mother. One way or another, he will know that. I waited in the parking lot for nearly an hour before I saw her. Elise. She looked almost unrecognizable in the fading afternoon light, her long hair chopped into a blunt bob, a hoodie covering most of her face, but it was her. And more than anything else, I recognized the curve of the bundle strapped against her chest. I sat in my car, hands clenched around the steering wheel, my breath shallow as I watched her step out of the consignment store with a canvas tote dangling from her shoulder. A clerk held the door open, chatting kindly, and Elise nodded politely before turning toward a small gray hatchback parked 3 spots down from mine. My eyes never left the baby. My baby? Owen was nestled against her in a soft sling, his little fist curling just outside the fabric, a pacifier bobbing between his lips. I didn't follow her that day. I couldn't. My limbs had turned to stone, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just seen. After 6 months of searching, 6 months of watching the world move on while mine froze in place, I had found her. And she was calm, confident, moving through life as if none of this were extraordinary. As if the child she had stolen didn't belong to me. I drove home numb, replaying every moment, every detail, until the lines between rage and grief blurred into one endless, suffocating fog. I didn't tell Noah right away. He was already unraveling in his own way, barely eating, throwing himself into late nights at work, snapping at friends and strangers alike. The guilt was unbearable. He had trusted me to handle the legal side, to make sure we had every safeguard in place. But I hadn't pushed hard enough. I had let myself be reassured by paper instead of reality. She seemed so genuine, I'd told him once, and he hadn't responded, just stared past me like I was a ghost. So I waited, biding time, gathering proof. Celeste didn't approve. "You should have confronted her," she said over the phone, her tone clipped. "At the very least, you could have followed her home." But I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not yet. I needed more than a sighting. I needed leverage. Over the next week, I returned to the consignment store twice more, blending in as best I could, chatting with the clerks, pretending to be just another mom prepping for her first baby. I learned that Elise came in every Thursday around noon. She always asked for the same employee, Brenda, and usually spent 20 minutes browsing, never in a rush. I even managed to strike up a conversation with Brenda one afternoon, commenting on a display of gently used sleep sacks. "That other mom mentioned these," I said casually. "The one with the short hair and baby boy?" Brenda's eyes lit up. "Oh, she's the sweetest. So gentle with that baby. You can tell she's completely devoted. It's refreshing, you know? Some moms just get it." That word, devoted, cut deeper than I expected. I knew Owen's schedule better than she ever could. I had written his feeding plan, chosen his formula brand, hand-stitched his name onto the baby quilt still folded on the rocking chair in what should have been his nursery. I'd memorized books on infant development, tracked feeding times, even debated glass versus plastic bottles for months. Elise had only stepped in for the carrying. The vessel. That's what she'd said during one of our early meetings. "I'm just the vessel." And yet now, she was being praised for a devotion that was never meant to be hers. The following Thursday, I came prepared. I wore dark sunglasses and pulled my hair into a messy bun under a cap. Celeste waited nearby in an unmarked car, ready to follow Elise once she left. I went into the store as she arrived, pretending to browse while watching her through a mirror above the checkout counter. She moved easily, chatting with Brenda, laughing softly. Owen peeked out from his sling, now bigger, rounder, with tufts of dark hair and cheeks I recognized from the 3D sonograms I used to cry over. I stepped closer. My hands shook. I reached for a pacifier off the wall, pretending to inspect it while positioning myself just feet from her. Her voice floated over to me. "We're finally sleeping through the night." "Well, almost." She laughed again. "He loves this bear rattle. He won't let go of it." I turned slightly. "That's a good sign," I said, heart pounding. "Sounds like you're doing a great job." Elise glanced at me and smiled, polite but distant. "We're trying," she said, adjusting the strap on her carrier. Her eyes flicked over my face, and for a second I thought she recognized me. But no, her expression remained neutral. She turned back to Brenda, ending the interaction as casually as it had begun. She didn't recognize me. Or maybe she did. That night, Celeste texted me the address she'd followed Elise to, a small townhouse in an older Richmond neighborhood. She lived alone, no roommate, no listed lease. Utilities under a generic LLC. Mailbox nameplate scratched off. It was a hideaway, constructed deliberately. And yet within it was my son. I stared at the address for a long time, uncertain whether to feel triumph or despair. I waited 2 more days before I went. Noah didn't know I'd gone. I told him I was visiting a friend in Charlottesville. He nodded absently, barely listening. He hadn't said Owen's name aloud in months. The townhouse was modest, blue siding, overgrown hedges, a wind chime with faded petals. I parked across the street and watched. Elise came out mid-morning, trash bag in one hand, phone pressed to her ear. She looked exhausted, her movements slow, distracted. She didn't see me. Once she returned inside, I got out of the car and crossed the street. My hands trembled as I approached the mailbox. I didn't intend to break the law, but I had to know. I needed confirmation. Something, anything, that tied Owen to this place. There was a baby magazine stuffed inside, a flyer for a pediatrician's office, a bill from a local pharmacy, and then, wedged between a circular and a pizza menu, a medical invoice addressed to Elise Mallory for an infant wellness check. The name field under patient stopped me cold. Owen Mallory. Mallory. She had given him her last name. I staggered back to the car and sat there in silence. I could barely process it. She had erased us entirely. Erased me. I called Celeste. "We need to file again," I told her. "With this address. With this name. It won't be simple," she warned. "You'll need proof of intent. That she knew the contract. That she defied it deliberately. You'll be under scrutiny, Abigail. Every move you've made these past months, any message, any conversation, they'll look for cracks." "Then we leave no cracks," I said. The next week, I hired a new attorney. This one specialized in cross-jurisdictional surrogacy law. She was blunt, meticulous, and unforgiving. We drafted a new case file. Elise would be served. There would be a court date. But I couldn't stop thinking about Owen. Every night, I lay awake imagining him just an hour's drive away. Was he laughing? Teething? Learning to crawl? Did he smile when he saw her face? Did he know her voice better than mine? I was his mother. But did he even know me at all? That was the question I couldn't escape. Not even in sleep. Not even in dreams. The day the court papers were served, I didn't feel victorious. I expected some flicker of triumph, maybe a sense of forward momentum after months of grief calcified into obsession, but what I felt was emptier. Like I'd finally lit the match, only to realize the smoke wouldn't tell me whether this house of lies would burn clean or burn everything I loved to the ground. Elise had 21 days to respond. The papers were delivered by a professional process server who confirmed that yes, she had accepted them at her front door with a tight-lipped nod, the baby cradled against her hip. She didn't slam the door. She didn't say a word. She just disappeared behind it, and from that moment forward, we all waited. Noah was furious when he found out I'd gone forward without telling him. We fought late into the night, the kind of fight where every sentence starts with "you never" and ends with slammed doors. "I'm his father, Abigail," he spat, pacing the living room in boxers and an old college sweatshirt. "You don't get to make these decisions without me." I didn't argue the point. He was right. But the truth I didn't say aloud, the one lodged like a shard in my throat, was that he hadn't wanted to make the decision. Not really. Not since the hospital. Not since Elise had walked out with Owen and the system had rolled over and let her do it. Noah had retreated into silence, into work, into something that looked like waiting but was really surrender. I didn't blame him. I just couldn't follow him. The new attorney, MS. Callahan, was relentless. She dug up every clause in the original agreement, every text Elise had sent confirming her intent to relinquish parental rights. She submitted records of our financial contributions, medical receipts, and even an affidavit from our therapist confirming the emotional toll of the betrayal. But it wasn't enough to prove a contract had been breached. We had to prove Elise never intended to honor it. That she'd entered the agreement under false pretenses. We needed motive. I turned to Celeste again. There has to be something, I said, pacing her cramped office lined with corkboards and court sketches. Something, she said. Something that tells us she planned this. Celeste tapped her pen against a manila folder and gave me a look that suggested I might not like what she'd found. She's on a parenting forum, she said finally. Started posting right before the baby was born. At first, it's vague. Just questions about feeding schedules and newborn sleep. But then, about a month in, she posts a story. Says she's a single mother who decided to keep a child from a complicated situation. Calls it a miracle. Says she couldn't walk away after feeling him kick. I sat down hard. So she's telling strangers the truth. Her version of it, yes. Celeste pushed the folder toward me. Inside were screenshots, usernames, IP logs. It's under a pseudonym, but the timestamps line up with her location history. It's her. She knew what she was doing before the delivery. She just didn't say it out loud until it was too late. We submitted the posts as part of our case file. Callahan was pleased. It helps, she said, but then paused. Though I need to prepare you. Even with all this, the court will consider what's best for the child now. Not what was agreed upon months ago. Not who paid for what. Not even biology. It will come down to Owen's well-being. And, from what you've told me, Elise has created the appearance of stability. That word, appearance, stuck with me. Elise was a skilled illusionist. She had been from the beginning. The soft-spoken prenatal updates, the hand-knitted blanket, the Sunday FaceTimes. All of it had been calculated, curated. And I had fallen for it, not because I was naive, but because I wanted to believe in something good. Something rare. When the court date finally arrived, I wore a gray suit I hadn't touched since before the pregnancy. I pinned my hair back, left my makeup minimal. Noah wore a tie he hadn't bothered to straighten. We sat in the hallway outside the hearing room in stiff silence until Elise walked in. She was alone. No lawyer. No family. Just her and Owen, strapped in a sleek gray carrier against her chest. He looked bigger than I remembered, alert, his dark eyes scanning the corridor like he was already used to unfamiliar spaces. I couldn't stop staring at him. My son. Elise didn't look at us. Not once. She signed in, then took a seat in the far corner, rocking slightly as Owen stirred in his sling. The silence was unbearable, thick with unspoken memories and unsaid things. In the hearing, she finally spoke. I didn't mean to deceive anyone, she said, her voice measured. I intended to go through with the agreement. But once I carried him, once I gave birth, something changed. I know that doesn't undo the contract. I know what I signed. But I also know what it felt like to look into his eyes and realize he was mine in a way I hadn't expected. A mess. Callahan countered with precision. But he isn't yours. You are not genetically related. You entered a legal agreement with the understanding that you would not be the child's guardian. You accepted medical and financial support under those terms. Elise nodded. I understand that. But he knows me now. I've raised him. He smiles when I sing. He cries when I leave the room. I'm not trying to take something that isn't mine. I'm trying to protect someone who doesn't know any other mother. And there it was, the line that unraveled me. The judge asked for a recess. The room cleared, but I couldn't move. My hands had balled into fists so tightly my fingernails left crescents in my palms. I walked out into the hallway and found Elise already there, bouncing slightly on her heels as she whispered to Owen. I walked toward her before I could stop myself. He's my son, I said, low and sharp. She looked up slowly. Her expression didn't change. He's our son, she said. Whether you like it or not. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked the one question I hadn't dared to before. Why did you even agree to this? Why offer to carry a child you planned to keep? Elise sighed. I didn't plan it. Not at first. I thought I could do it. Thought I could hand him over. But then I started to feel it, like he was already inside more than just my body. You know what it's like, Abigail. You wanted to be a mother so badly. You think that feeling disappears for me just because I wasn't supposed to keep him. No, I said. But you don't get to rewrite the rules just because you changed your mind. She looked down at Owen, who gurgled softly in his sling. The law will decide that, she said. The judge requested more documentation. Another hearing was scheduled. Everything delayed again. And as the days passed, the line between legal and emotional custody grew more jagged. I started seeing a therapist. Noah and I tried to reconnect, though it often felt like we were just walking parallel paths, close but never touching. He talked about moving, about starting over, about if we got Owen back, what that would even look like. One night, I walked into the nursery and found the quilt still on the rocking chair, covered in a thin layer of dust. I sat down, cradled it in my lap, and whispered Owen's name, over and over, until it stopped sounding like a name and started sounding like a prayer. The next day, Elise called me. She'd never called before. Don't hang up, she said. Please. My heart stilled. What do you want? I want to meet, she said. Not in court. Just us. Just once. I didn't respond right away. But deep down, I already knew I would say yes. I had to know what kind of mother she really was, what kind of woman thought she could steal a child and call it love. And maybe, just maybe, I needed her to see what she had broken. Up close. Without a judge between us. So I agreed. We were going to meet. Face to face. Just me, her, and the boy we both claimed as our own. We met in a public park just outside the city limits, one of those well-kept family places with wide green lawns, safe-looking playground equipment, and picnic tables that hadn't yet been carved up by bored teenagers. Elise chose the spot, said it was neutral, safe. You can even bring someone if you want, she'd said on the phone. I didn't. I came alone. No lawyer, no Celeste, no Noah. I wore jeans and a sweater that used to fit looser, a pair of sunglasses I didn't take off, and I arrived 15 minutes early just to feel like I still had some kind of control. When she came into view, walking slowly across the grass with Owen strapped to her front, my stomach clenched with something too complicated to name. He was wearing a navy beanie with two soft little ears at the top, his cheeks pink from the wind, eyes wide and unfocused the way babies often look at the world. Elise waved one hand as she approached but didn't smile. She looked thinner than before, her posture hunched in a way I hadn't noticed during the hearing. Maybe it was the weight of him. Or maybe she was just tired, in that deep, cellular way only mothers truly understand. We sat across from each other at a picnic table under a pavilion near the walking trail. She didn't put Owen down, and I didn't ask her to. My hands trembled under the table. I didn't know what I had expected. An apology? A plea? Maybe some half-formed justification about maternal instinct or emotional bonds. What I got instead was silence. Elise adjusted the sling, opened a thermos, took a sip of what smelled like herbal tea, and just looked at me. "I know what you think of me," she said finally. I let the words settle before answering. "I think you're a woman who made a promise and broke it. And I think you know that." She nodded. "I do." "Then why?" I asked. "Why drag this out? Why the court, the lawyers, the hiding, all of it? Why not just give him back?" She didn't flinch. "Because he's not a box of possessions I mistakenly took home. He's a person. A baby. A human being who has known one mother since the minute he left my body. And I don't say that to twist the knife. I'm saying it because it's the truth." "You think you're his mother," I said, voice flat. "I am his mother," she replied, just as flat. "You can't gestate a child, feed it from your own body for months, and not become attached. You think biology is the only thing that matters, but it isn't. Love matters. Time matters." I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. I planned every detail of his life. I chose his name. I built his nursery. I felt the world collapse when you took him. You carried him, yes. But you agreed to do it for us. You weren't supposed to become his mother. That was never part of the plan." She looked down at Owen, who was now blinking drowsily, his small face tilted toward her chest. She reached up to touch his cheek and said, "Plans change." For a moment, all I could hear was the rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant squeal of children on the playground. Then Elise spoke again, softer this time. "I was supposed to do it for the money," she said. "That's the truth. I wanted to believe I had noble reasons, but I didn't. My ex had left, I was months behind on rent, and the surrogacy seemed like a clean deal. I'd done it once before, years ago, for a couple in Florida. It went fine. I told myself I could do it again. Be clinical about it. But it wasn't the same this time." "What changed?" I asked. She looked me in the eye, and for the first time, I saw something that almost resembled shame. "You were too kind," she said. "You sent me care packages. You wrote letters to him. You talked about him like he already existed. You made him real before I could pretend he wasn't. I would lie awake at night with my hand on my belly, feeling him move, knowing he wasn't mine. And then something in me started to shift. I couldn't tell you. I didn't even tell myself. But by the 8th month, I knew I wasn't going to be able to let go." "And you didn't tell us?" I whispered. "You let us walk into that hospital thinking we were going home with our child." She nodded. "I was a coward. I told myself I'd hand him over at the last minute. That it would hurt, but I'd do it. But when they placed him on my chest, something locked in. I knew I'd never be able to say goodbye. I know that makes me selfish. I've made peace with that. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or collapse. I had imagined her to be cold, manipulative, someone who planned this betrayal from day one. But what I saw now was something more complicated and, in some ways, even more infuriating. She had wanted to be selfless, and when she couldn't, she ran. "So what now?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer right away. She reached into the bag beside her and pulled out something soft, wrapped in tissue. "I didn't know if I'd give this to you," she said, pushing it across the table. "But I think you should have it." I unwrapped the tissue slowly, and there it was, Owen's hospital bracelet. Still curled, still bearing his date of birth and the last name Harris. My last name. My hands started to shake. "I kept it," she said. Not to hurt you. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself that he wasn't always mine. I stared at it, speechless. I'm not saying I've made the right decisions, Elise said. But I've loved him every second of his life. I've stayed up nights when he couldn't breathe. I've held him while he cried until dawn. I've kissed every bump and rocked him through every fever. You need to understand that I'm not giving him back to someone who lost a misplaced wallet. You're asking me to rip apart the only world he's ever known. So, what are you suggesting? I asked. I want to talk, she said. Really talk. Not in court. Not through lawyers. You and me. And maybe, just maybe, there's a path here that doesn't destroy him. Shared custody? I said, the words tasting foreign in my mouth. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just said, he deserves a future that isn't built on a war between two women who both believe they're right. That night, I went home and collapsed into bed without speaking to Noah. I couldn't. The meeting had left me hollowed out. I stared at the bracelet for hours, running my fingers over the letters like a rosary. Elise had stolen so much from me, and yet she'd also raised my son when I couldn't. That contradiction pulsed like a wound I didn't know how to dress. I didn't know what came next. Whether I would agree to her plan or fight her in court until one of us broke. But I did know one thing. I couldn't keep pretending this was simple. Owen was real. Alive. Growing. Loving. Bonded. And I had to figure out if reclaiming him would give him back to me or destroy the part of him I was trying so desperately to save. The proposal came 2 days later, emailed without introduction or apology. Elise had titled it a transition plan. It wasn't a legal draft, just a document she'd written in plain language, bullet points, soft phrases, careful words. At first, I couldn't even open the attachment. I stared at it for nearly an hour, the subject line like a taunt in my inbox. When I finally clicked, the room went silent. I forgot I was even breathing. She was offering shared custody, not as a compromise, not formally, but as a process. A progression. Week by week, she would allow more time with Owen, supervised visits at first, then daytime hours, then overnights. In 3 months, we would reevaluate. If he bonded, if he adjusted, if she could bear it. Nothing about it was binding, and nothing in it acknowledged what she had taken from us. Instead, it read like a piece offering stitched together by someone who wanted to appear generous while still keeping control of the narrative. Noah hated it immediately. This isn't a plan, it's a hostage negotiation, he said, pushing his laptop across the kitchen counter. You know what this is? It's her stalling, dragging this out to wear us down so the courts give her the edge for stability. She's a manipulator, Abigail. I stirred my coffee, my stomach turning. But she's also the only person he knows as a mother. She shouldn't be. She is. I said it too loudly, and the sound of my own voice broke something in the room. Noah went silent. He looked at me for a long time, the skin under his eyes dark with months of grief neither of us had figured out how to carry. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. I'm not going to lose him twice. Neither was I. But part of me, the part that woke up every night sweating and aching from dreams of carrying a child I'd never held, knew the truth Noah didn't want to say out loud. Owen didn't know us. He didn't recognize our voices. He hadn't seen our faces in 6 months. If we showed up at his door with a court order tomorrow and pulled him from Elise's arms, he would cry until he couldn't breathe. He wouldn't call out for me. He wouldn't call me Mama. That truth terrified me more than anything Elise had done. I called my lawyer. A mess. Callahan read the email and said, "This is legally meaningless. If we accept any part of it, she'll use it in court to establish co-parenting precedent." I strongly advise against engaging outside the legal framework. But what if she's sincere? I asked. Callahan hesitated. Then she should put it in writing with a judge. That night, I sat in the nursery again. The quilt was still draped over the rocking chair, the crib untouched. I hadn't changed a single thing in the room since Elise walked out of that hospital. A thin film of dust had gathered on the windowsill. The mobiles were still boxed in the closet. I kept thinking, if he came home tomorrow, would this space comfort him or scare him? I needed answers I couldn't find in court transcripts or custody paperwork. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to see Elise again. Without telling Noah. Without telling Callahan. I waited outside her townhouse until dusk, parked 2 doors down with the engine off, headlights dimmed. She opened the door eventually, stepping out onto the porch in a sweater, Owen bundled in a sleep sack against her chest. I didn't approach. I just sat and watched. And that's when it happened. Owen began to cry. Not a whimper. A sharp, visceral sob that made my body tense just hearing it. Elise bounced him gently, cooing softly, murmuring a lullaby I recognized immediately. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. I had sung that to him. Every day into my phone, during pregnancy. I'd sent the recordings to Elise as part of our agreement. She was supposed to play them in the womb, to start forming attachment. I had recorded 17 lullabies in total, each with my voice, my rhythm, my words. And now she was singing them to him like they were hers. I opened my car door and stepped out into the cold night air. Elise, I called. She turned, startled. For a second, I thought she might run inside and lock the door. But she didn't. She stayed on the porch, her eyes wary. I just need 5 minutes, I said. She nodded slowly. He's going down soon. I won't come inside. I just need to ask you something. She walked down the steps with Owen still nestled against her. We stood under the flickering porch light, the street quiet around us. Her arms tightened protectively, and I hated how natural it looked. I heard you, I said. Singing. She looked down at him, then back at me. It calms him. It was supposed to be me. There was no venom in her voice when she answered. Just exhaustion. I know. I'm not asking to forget the past 6 months, I continued. But if we keep fighting like this, if we tear each other apart in court, it won't just hurt us. It'll hurt him. And I think you know that. Elise nodded slowly. What are you saying? I want to meet him, I said. Not as a stranger in a courthouse. As a mother. Just one visit. No lawyers. No arguments. Let me be in the same room as him. Let him see my face. Hear my voice. She studied me for a long time. Owen stirred, a tiny hand slipping out from the blanket, reaching toward the air. I instinctively moved forward before stopping myself. I'll think about it, she said. But if I agree, it's for him, not for you. I nodded. That's all I want. She turned and disappeared into the house. I stayed outside for 10 minutes, letting the cold settle into my bones. I didn't cry. Not yet. The next day, she texted me. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. 1 hour. No Noah. Just you. I spent the entire night preparing like I was stepping into battle. I packed a diaper bag with toys I'd bought 6 months earlier but never used. I printed photos of the nursery, the quilt, his first onesies. I even pulled the blanket off the rocker and folded it into the tote. I didn't know what I would do with any of it, only that I needed something of mine in that room with him. When I walked through her front door the next afternoon, my heart was thudding so loudly I thought she could hear it. The house was small, clean, lived in. A soft scent of baby powder lingered in the air. Elise led me to the living room, where Owen sat in a cushioned floor seat, blinking at a spinning toy. His hair was thicker now, his eyes darker than I remembered. He looked at me the way babies look at unfamiliar sounds, curious, unafraid, unknowing. "Hi," I said softly, kneeling beside him. He didn't react. Not at first. Then he reached for the toy again. Elise stood back, arms crossed. She didn't interrupt. I began to talk, to narrate the way I used to in Elise's belly. I picked up a plush bear, waved it gently, made it dance. I sang a lullaby, my voice cracking. I told him who I was. Not your real mom, not the woman who paid, not the one who was supposed to have you. Just Abigail. His eyes found mine. He didn't smile, but he didn't cry. And then, just once, he reached for the quilt in my lap. Something in my chest gave way. Elise didn't say anything until the hour was nearly up. "He doesn't know what any of this means yet," she said quietly. "But that doesn't mean he won't." I nodded. "I know." We stood there, two women who had started on the same path and landed in separate worlds. Neither of us was innocent. Neither of us untouched. But in that moment, we weren't enemies. Just two mothers who had loved the same child in two different ways and now had to decide which version of that love would survive. As I left the house, Owen's faint coo followed me into the sunlight. It was the first sound I'd ever heard from him in person. And I realized I would never forget it. Not for the rest of my life. The court date was set for 2 weeks later, a custody hearing with teeth this time. No more temporary motions. No more visits scribbled onto calendars with pencil. This was the hearing that would determine, once and for all, who Owen legally belonged to. I could hardly believe how calm I felt walking into the courthouse that morning, as if my body had finally exhausted all the adrenaline and grief it had been burning through for months. My palms didn't sweat. My knees didn't shake. I had imagined this moment so many times, winning it, losing it, screaming in the hallway, collapsing in a judge's chambers, but I hadn't imagined this, a quiet sort of resolve that sat inside me like something earned. Elise arrived 10 minutes after us. She wore a dark green dress with a baby-worn sling wrapped tight around her torso, but Owen wasn't with her. She'd left him with a sitter, one of her neighbors. I wondered how she'd explained the day. Did she say it was a hearing? A meeting? Did she tell the woman watching him that this might be the last time Owen fell asleep to her voice? A mess. Callahan met me at the front of the building. She had her briefcase, her binder of exhibits, her glasses glinting in the sun. She gave me a quick once-over and said, "You look prepared." "I don't feel that way," I admitted. "You don't have to feel it," she replied. "You just have to be it." The hearing room was sterile and bland, its only warmth coming from the morning light slanting through the high windows. It made the dust in the air look golden. As we sat, I realized Elise and I had chosen seats on opposite ends of the same bench. Not across the aisle. Not flanked by entourages. Just two women, alone but tethered to the same invisible center. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with an unreadable face and a penchant for silence, took her time reading the opening briefs. She asked no questions for the first 15 minutes. Then, quietly, she asked Elise to stand. A mess. "Mallory, do you understand the nature of this hearing?" "I do." "You've read the claims brought forward by the Harris family?" "I have." "Do you dispute that you entered into a formal agreement to act as a gestational surrogate for the child in question?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you acknowledge that Abigail and Noah Harris are the child's biological parents?" "Yes." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Then what exactly are you asking this court to consider today?" Elise didn't hesitate. "That biology isn't the only measure of parenthood. That in the 6 months since Owen's birth, I have been the only consistent caregiver. That I didn't abandon him, or harm him, or exploit the situation." I raised him. I loved him. I still do. And you want to retain custody? The judge asked. I want him to be safe. To be loved. If that means staying with them, then yes, I'll accept it. But if there's any way to share him, I want to try. The judge was quiet again, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker behind her stillness. Weariness, maybe. Recognition. Callahan stood then. She spoke with precision, laying out the timeline, the contracts, the evidence, the breach of agreement, the emotional damage, the investigative work tracing Elise's disappearance, the forum posts, the receipts, all of it packaged tightly like a net meant to hold a decision down. And when it was my turn to speak, I stood without notes. I didn't carry him, I said. But I created him. I spoke to him every day during the pregnancy, through recordings, through gifts, through love. I chose his name before he had a face. I built a life around his arrival. And when he was taken from me, it didn't just break my heart, it shattered everything I believed about trust and promises and what motherhood meant. I looked across the room at Elise. But despite everything, I know she's taken care of him. I've seen it. I've watched her sing to him with my voice. I've seen the bond they have. And while that doesn't change what happened, it does change what's at stake. This isn't about punishment. It's about a child. The judge leaned back. And what do you believe is best for that child now? It was the question I had feared from the beginning, but when it came, the answer was already inside me. I want my son, I said. But I don't want to steal him from someone who held him when I couldn't. If there's a way for him to have both of us somehow, I want that. Not for me. Not even for her. For him. The room was still. It took 4 days for the ruling to come. We were given joint legal custody, with full physical custody granted to me, to transition over the next 60 days. The judge acknowledged the legal breach, but stopped short of stripping Elise entirely. Instead, the ruling allowed for a slow integration, starting with visits, then overnights, then permanent residence. The court mandated co-parenting therapy, infant bonding sessions, and a parenting plan to be filed with the court every 90 days for 1 full year. It was more than I had hoped for, less than I had dreamed. When I read the ruling, I cried until my hands went numb. Noah held me that night, in the nursery, for the first time in months. He whispered something I barely caught, "We're bringing him home." And we just stayed there, wrapped in silence, the dust in the room turning golden again. The day Elise brought Owen to us for the first official transition visit, he clung to her shirt. He looked at our house with wide, anxious eyes. He didn't reach for me right away. He needed time. I expected that. But when I sat down on the floor beside him, holding out the same plush bear he'd once reached for, he smiled. Just a flicker. A beginning. Elise watched us from the doorway, her arms folded, her face unreadable. And then she said, "He remembers your voice." Even now. I looked at her then, really looked. Not as a thief. Not as an enemy. Just as another woman who had found herself undone by motherhood and had tried, in her own messy, desperate way, to hold on to something too big for her hands. "Thank you," I said, "for keeping him safe." She nodded, her eyes wet. "Thank you for letting me say goodbye like this." The visits continued. The calendar filled. Owen learned my face, my scent, my arms. Slowly, he started to reach for me before he cried. Slowly, his smile came faster when he saw me. He didn't forget her. He never will. And I've come to believe that maybe he shouldn't. There are different kinds of mothers in the world. Some carry you. Some raise you. Some find you in courtrooms, in waiting rooms, in broken plans and restored promises. And some, like Elise and me, Learn how to share the space around a child's heart without tearing each other to pieces. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but maybe it was the one he needed.